a convicted killer walked straight to Tupac's table, pulled out the chair, and said, "This seat is mine now." What Tupac did in the next 30 seconds made every inmate in that cafeteria go completely silent, and nobody ever questioned him again. This is the story of the moment that defined Tupac Shakur's entire time at Clinton Correctional Facility. If you want the full story, hit subscribe. We drop new Tupac prison stories every single day. This is the story of the moment that defined Tupac Shakur's entire time at Clinton Correctional Facility. The moment that separated who he was on the outside from who he would become on the inside. And the moment that every inmate, every guard, and every person who was in that cafeteria would talk about for years. It was the fall of 1995. Tupac Shakur had been at Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York for several weeks. He was 24 years old, one of the most recognized names in the entire music industry, and now just another number inside one of the most maximum security prisons in the state of New York. The intake process had stripped away everything. The jewelry, the clothes, the entourage, the studio sessions, the crowds of people who wanted to be near him. All of it was gone. What remained was a young man in a prison uniform trying to figure out how to survive a world that operated by completely different rules than anything he had ever known. Prison life at Clinton was structured, brutal, and unforgiving. There were no second chances in the social hierarchy of that facility. Every single day was a test. Every interaction carried weight. Every decision you made in front of other inmates sent a message about who you were and what you would tolerate. The men inside those walls had been there for years, some for decades. They had built their reputations slowly, carefully, through 1,000 small moments that added up to either respect or vulnerability. And when someone new arrived, especially someone famous, the testing began immediately. Tupac had already felt it in the first few weeks. The stares that lasted a little too long. The conversations that stopped when he walked into a room. The way certain inmates positioned themselves near him. Not out of friendship, but out of curiosity. They wanted to know what he was made of. Fame on the outside meant absolutely nothing inside those walls. What mattered was how you carried yourself when nobody was watching, and how you responded when somebody decided to find out exactly where your limits were. The cafeteria at Clinton was one of the few places where the entire inmate population moved through the same space. It was loud, crowded, and constantly tense with an energy that never fully settled. Hundreds of men eating institutional food under fluorescent lights, conducting the invisible business of prison politics through glances and gestures and words that meant 10 different things depending on who was saying them and who was listening. The guards watched from elevated positions around the perimeter, present but deliberate in how much they chose to see. Tupac had developed a routine in those first weeks. He moved through the cafeteria carefully, chose a spot away from the main traffic, kept his head down, ate his food, and returned to his cell without engaging in anything unnecessary. He was not naive. He understood that this environment demanded a certain kind of discipline that had nothing to do with music or fame. It demanded patience, awareness, and the ability to read a room before the room decided to read you. On this particular afternoon, Tupac went through the lunch line, collected his tray, and made his way to an open table near the far wall. He sat down, positioned himself with his back to the wall, a habit that had become instinctive since his first day, and began to eat. The cafeteria was moving at its usual rhythm. Noise, movement, 100 quiet conversations happening simultaneously. That was when Marcus walked in. Marcus had been at Clinton for 9 years. He was 31 years old, lean but hardened in the way that only years of institutional life could harden a person. He had arrived at the facility as a convicted killer, sentenced to 25 years, and in the time since he had built something inside those walls that most men spent their entire sentences trying to build. Influence. Not the loud, aggressive kind that burned itself out quickly. The quiet kind. the kind that other inmates deferred to without being told to, the kind that guards were careful around. Marcus did not need to raise his voice to make his presence felt. He simply moved through the facility with the certainty of someone who understood that he owned his space in a way that paperwork and uniforms could never challenge. Marcus had been watching Tupac since he arrived, not with hostility, at least not openly, but with the calculating attention of someone who understood that a famous arrival disrupted the established order of things. When someone like Tupac walked into a facility like Clinton, it shifted the attention of the entire inmate population. It created a new center of gravity, and Marcus, who had spent 9 years making himself the center of gravity in that facility, was not interested in competition. He walked directly to Tupac's table. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. 3 inmates who had been sitting at nearby tables quietly relocated without a word, reading the situation before it fully developed. Marcus reached the table, placed one hand on the back of the chair directly across from Tupac, pulled it out slowly, and sat down. He did not ask. He did not hesitate. He simply sat, placed his tray on the table, and looked directly at Tupac with an expression that carried the full weight of 9 years of accumulated authority. "This seat is mine now," Marcus said. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but every inmate within earshot heard it and went still. The cafeteria did not go silent all at once. It happened in a wave, spreading outward from that table as one person noticed, then another, then another. Within 15 seconds, the section of the cafeteria surrounding Tupac and Marcus had gone completely quiet. Men who had been mid-conversation stopped talking. Men who had been focused on their food looked up. Everyone understood what was happening. This was not about a chair. This was a declaration. Marcus was establishing, in front of as many witnesses as possible, that Tupac Shakur did not have special status inside Clinton Correctional Facility. That fame was a currency that held no value here, that the rules of this world applied to everyone equally, and that Marcus was one of the people who enforced those rules. Tupac looked up from his food. He looked at Marcus. He did not look away. He did not look around the room to gauge the reaction of the other inmates. He did not look toward the guards. He held Marcus's gaze with an expression that was completely calm, completely present, and completely unafraid. Then Tupac looked back down at his food and continued eating. He did not move. He did not speak. He did not acknowledge the statement in any way that suggested it had landed with the intended effect. He simply continued eating at the same pace, with the same composure, as if Marcus had said nothing at all. The silence in that section of the cafeteria became something physical. Every person watching understood that something significant had just happened, but it had happened so quietly, so completely without drama, that it took a moment to process. Marcus had made his move, and Tupac had responded not with words, not with aggression, but with something that was somehow more powerful than either. Absolute stillness. Marcus stared at Tupac for a long moment. The calculation in his expression shifted slightly. He had expected one of 2 responses, confrontation or retreat. He had not expected this. He had not expected someone to simply absorb his challenge and continue existing as if it had not occurred. That kind of response required a certain kind of confidence that Marcus had encountered very rarely in 9 years inside walls. It was the confidence of someone who genuinely did not need the approval or the fear of the people around him to feel secure in where he stood. After what felt like a very long time, Marcus picked up his tray, stood up from the chair, and walked back to his usual table without a word. He did not look back. He did not acknowledge what had just happened in any way that would require him to explain it to the men watching. The cafeteria gradually returned to its normal noise level, but the conversation that ran underneath that noise for the rest of the afternoon was entirely about what had just happened at that table near the far wall. In the days that followed, something shifted inside Clinton Correctional Facility. Not dramatically, not overnight, but in the way that real shifts happen inside a place like that, quietly, incrementally, through 100 small interactions that built on each other until the cumulative effect became impossible to ignore. Inmates who had been testing Tupac, probing for weakness, stopped probing. Men who had watched him carefully from a distance started watching him with a different kind of attention. Even Marcus, who continued to move through the facility with his usual authority, gave Tupac a different kind of space. Not the space you give someone you fear, the space you give someone you have decided to respect. Tupac would later reflect on that period as one of the most formative experiences of his life, not because of the hardship, though the hardship was real, but because of what it taught him about the nature of strength. He had walked into Clinton Correctional Facility as one of the most famous young men in the country, and he had learned, in the most direct way possible, that fame was a story other people told about you. Strength was something different. Strength was what remained when every external marker of who you were had been stripped away. And what remained, in that cafeteria, at that table, in that 30 seconds of complete silence, had been enough. Nobody who was in that cafeteria on that afternoon ever forgot what they saw. Not because of what was said, but because of what was not said. In a place where every interaction was a negotiation and every moment of perceived weakness was a door left open for someone else to walk through, Tupac Shakur had done something that most men inside those walls spent years trying to figure out how to do. He had held his ground without making it a fight. He had communicated everything that needed to be communicated without a single word. He had understood, instinctively, that the most powerful response to a challenge is sometimes the one that refuses to recognize the challenge as leak. That afternoon in the cafeteria was not the end of Tupac's time at Clinton Correctional Facility. It was, in many ways, just the beginning. But it was the moment that established, beyond any further question, who Tupac Shakur was when the music stopped and the real world closed in around him. And for every inmate who witnessed it, that question had been answered completely. If this story showed you something real about who Tupac Shakur was beyond the music, beyond the headlines, beyond everything the world thought it knew about him, then you already understand why this channel exists. Every single day we bring you the stories that never made the news, the moments that happened inside those walls that most people never heard about. The real Tupac, not the legend, not the myth. The man who walked into one of the most dangerous correctional facilities in the state of New York and walked out with his dignity completely intact. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story, because the story you just heard is only the beginning. There is so much more, and every single one of them will hit you exactly like this one did.